Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike, and I'm a glass very full sort of person. We're continuing in our study of John's Gospel, and starting with John and his fishing partner Andrew, just outside Jerusalem, Jesus is gathering his disciples, quickly followed by Peter, Philip, and Nathanael. Nathanael, of course, his full name is Nathanael Bartholomew, and he's referred to as Bartholomew in the Synoptic Gospels, the other Gospels, and in Acts. And all of these men have been deeply moved by their first encounter with Jesus, when Jesus looks into their eyes, looks into the eyes of each of them, and speaks to them personally. And now the scene moves to Cana. That's Philip and Andrew's hometown, a thriving market town in Galilee, not far from the sleepy hamlet of Nazareth. And the wedding at Cana provides the backdrop for the first of 7 signs of Jesus' ministry, which John wants to tell us about. John calls them signs rather than miracles. And this one and some others only appear in John's Gospel. And remember that John's Gospel is very carefully structured so that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Now, there must have been thousands, possibly millions of sermons preached on the wedding at Cana. So forgive me if I'm not able to add anything to what centuries of preachers have already conveyed. But nonetheless, this is an important passage worthy of our attention. So I'm reading John chapter 2, starting at verse 1. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says, just do it." Now there were set here 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of the purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now, and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior wine. You have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they did not stay there many days. So, very familiar story of the wedding at Cana. And it starts off by saying, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. So, on the third day actually means 2 days since Philip and Nathanael had been added to Jesus' growing band of disciples when they had set off for Cana. John tells us that Jesus' mother Mary was at the wedding, although he doesn't mention her by name. But not Joseph. And this has led some scholars to conclude that by this time Joseph was already dead, and that Jesus had perhaps only begun his ministry after having shouldered responsibility for his younger siblings until their age of majority. And Mary may well have been the mother of the bridegroom at this wedding. Verse 3 says, "And they ran out of wine. The mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.'" This was a very serious incident. To run out of wine at such a celebration was an unforgivable lapse of hospitality. And Jesus' response to his mother is very intriguing. Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." He calls Mary woman, not mother. And this appears at first rather impolite and disrespectful, but that's simply not true. The term woman is a mark of respect, and perhaps a better translation into English would be madam. And we shouldn't read into Jesus' phrase, "What does your concern have to do with me?" any hint of adolescent petulance. Jesus is simply saying that this is not his problem. And he goes on to say, "My hour has not yet come." And I think this means my ministry has not yet begun. Mary is clearly hoping that her son will do something important to rescue a difficult situation. And I think that Jesus is establishing here, firstly, that his relationship with Mary has now changed. He's now embarked on his Father's business. And secondly, that this transition is not yet complete. Jesus doesn't say, "No, I won't help." And Mary knows that Jesus hasn't said no, because immediately she says to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, just do it." Jesus, therefore, will not intervene out of some kind of childlike obedience to his mother, but because he does his Father's will. Verse 6 says, "Now there were set there 6 pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece." So these were typical large vessels used in ritual purification. And of course, John doesn't refer to gallons. Gallons is a Celtic word completely unknown to the Greeks. John says that the water pots were of 2 or 3 matrida. It's a Greek term. And for those of you who prefer Victorian measurements, what my physics lecturer called the rod-ton fortnight system, a matrida is the equivalent of around 9 gallons, or 70 pints. And if you prefer even older measurements, medieval units, a matrida is a firkin, But I'm a native European, so for me, a metrida is 40 litres. That means that in total, 6 water pots of 2 or 3 firkins each, this was the equivalent of 880 wine bottles. That's what Jesus produced for this wedding. Verse 7 says, Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them up to the brim. Now, Jesus could have done this on his own. But as we see with many other miracles of Jesus, he wanted men and women to be involved in the process, and therefore to be more blessed by it. And the servants certainly entered into the process with gusto. It says they filled them up to the brim. I think the servants predicted that Jesus was going to perform a wonderful transformation of the water in these water pots. So they wanted the miracle to be to the fullest extent. Verse 8 says, "And he, Jesus, said to them, 'Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast.'" So the servants, again, the ordinary people, they showed great faith to draw out some of this liquid, which they knew seconds ago was just water, and serve it to the master of the feast. The master of the feast was unaware of the miracle that Jesus had performed, and he was clearly astonished at the quality of the wine. Verse 10 says, "He said to him, the groom, 'Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior wine. You have kept the good wine until now.'" And the New King James Version is being a little bit euphemistic here when it says, "when the guests have well drunk." That's not the verb that's used in the Greek. The Greek translation is, "when the guests are well drunk." The word that John uses refers squarely to alcoholic inebriation. Verse 11 says, "The beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." For the Apostle John, the miracles of Jesus, the signs as he calls them, have a greater significance than simply demonstrations of his supernatural power. John wants us to remember that Moses turned water into blood, demonstrating that the law brings death. But Jesus turning water into wine speaks of the transformative power which Jesus presents, the new covenant of life out of the old covenant of ritual purification. Jesus is the new good wine, come to replace the old water. People often ask the question, are you a glass half empty person or a glass half full person? Well, as Christians, we're glass very full people. I never stop thanking God for all the undeserved gifts that I receive from him every day. I think I have no more room for God's blessings in my life, but still they come. To be part of God's kingdom of abundance, we yearn to be filled to the brim with God's grace, so that it overflows to the people around us. Non-Christians should see us as inexplicably fortunate individuals, not as people who are so good that they clearly deserve every bit of good fortune which comes their way. And in a recent large-scale psychological survey, researchers came to the inescapable and for them rather disturbing conclusion that people who regularly pray live longer and generally enjoy better health outcomes than those who don't. Our minds have a crucial effect on our bodies. So often our susceptibility to illness and the degree to which it impacts us physically is substantially a function of how we think about ourselves. Stress, anxiety, and worry are well-known killers. Of course, the researchers discounted any supernatural influences, and they settled upon two major psychological factors to explain their results. And the first is that prayer focuses our attention on the needs of others, and that this altruism diverts us from anxiety about ourselves. And secondly, people who pray have lives of purpose, which is bigger than themselves, and they're able to marshal their energies towards a positive goal. And like the servants at the wedding in Cana, we should do whatever Jesus asks us. We shouldn't try to challenge or modify or improve on his ideas. Just do it. Even if we don't understand why. Even if it sounds silly. Just do it. And do it up to the brim. Even if it puts us at risk. And in October, someone in distress emailed the church here. I responded, went to meet him, listened to his story, and I made sure that he had food and shelter over the weekend. Turns out that he's mentally ill. He's a fantasist who has a compulsion to weave a whole web of deceit, which to some degree he ends up believing. He's disappeared now, but I still want to help him. And I'm still concerned about his welfare. And I would do the same again. The boundless grace of God and the model of Jesus gives us the confidence to make ourselves vulnerable in order to help those in need. Amen.